Yeah, I'm gonna buy that one and that one. All of it. I need it all. Do you want it though? Where do I begin? I see the hate, they don't wanna see me win. Bank deposits, I got more coming in. Top down, throw the money in the wind. I don't.
Hey guys, welcome to another session of Educators Roundtable. We decided, Shannon and I talked about this, is continuing a conversation about education equity. In this conversation, when we originally started, we knew it wasn't just a one podcast conversation. We knew it would take us over several months. And the feedback that we've gotten from educators all over the world, not just here in the US, but also overseas, is that they want to have more conversations because we're kind of concerned at this point, not kind of, extremely concerned at where we are in education equity across the country when it comes to someone who's of a minority status, not just African American. We're talking about all minorities. And so when you look at education from that perspective, we're going to be calling on guest speakers from all over the country and politicians to join the conversation so we can move education forward for minorities. Now, my guest tonight, and I'm going to tell you, I got two rock stars. I'm going to tell you, when I get excited when people that I've known for years come on the podcast and they join the conversation. I get really excited about that stuff. So I'm going to tell you, Dr. Rush has been a mentor for me for the past 10 years. He's an amazing guy. And his perspective on education and things that he's done from a mentoring program, helping, multiple African-American young men transition into not only college, but into successful careers. His legacy is going to live on, and he's doing such an amazing job. And he's launched so many incredible projects and placed so many superintendents. It's amazing. So he's really working from the back end and the front end to ensure that education equity is taking place. Then we also have Dr. Latanya Spinelli. And let me tell you, I love when like other IT women join the conversation. And so she is the president and owner of the Education Tech Group, and she's a former superintendent. So I'm going to tell you, when you come from that lens, and you guys know my background, we don't get into that. Everybody knows enough about Christine. She and I are coming from the same lens. And I like that, So this is going to be an awesome conversation. So let me bring on board. So Dr. Latanya Spinelli, welcome to the Educators Roundtable.
It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to meet you, Christine. And Dr. Rush has been a friend of mine forever also. So I'm president, CEO of the EdTech Group. We've been around since 2010. And what we do is provide educational services, real industry standard certifications for underprivileged and for our people who are leaving incarceration and they need jobs. I also own a company in AI and cybersecurity. But all of that set aside, there is no reason why there's only a 4% minority population credentialed in information technology in those positions across the nation. And that statistic comes from the Department of Labor. And so I think underprivileged are not engaged in technology because they don't know. And so we are just wiping away the curtain and making this available with lots of resources. We give them a computer, we give them internet, we give them everything they need to be successful with an online curriculum. And that's it.
And I agree 100% when you say those things. It's so funny because as many tech conferences I go to, I'm often the only African-American, and I'm most often definitely the most African-American female there. So it's like when I meet someone like you, I'm like so excited because I feel like, okay, I'm not in this space by myself. And it's great because it's nice to have those conversations. So, you and I, we're going to have to talk offline because I also do a lot of stuff in cybersecurity, and I work with federal contracts and stuff like that. And our training program, and I'm going to talk about that more when it gets closer, but I'm working with Life Remodel here, which is a great program with Chris Lambert and his team. We're doing the IT Innovation Center out there. We're going to be providing training services for a lot of different people. And I partner with a really good friend of mine, Jermaine Stanley, who is the president of ISACA in DC, which is the Cybersecurity Association. So that's like one of my really good friends. And we decided to partner because he's originally from Detroit. He's a product of Detroit public school system like myself. And we're both in IT, and that's a rare thing, right? So we got to partner and do this. So we're really excited. So tonight we're just going to take this journey, and you and I will kind of talk about, where this journey is taking us since the 1800s up to present. When we look at education from a minority perspective, like, it's just really, when I was doing a lot of the research and putting this together, I was like, wow, this is like amazing to me that we're still, it's like we take 2 steps forward and then we take 20 back, and take 2 steps forward, and they want to give you the impression like we're really moving ahead, but I don't think we realize that we're not. And then, like, people like you and I seem to squeeze through, and then they want to use us as the example of, see, it does work. No, it doesn't. You have no idea what it took for us to get here. It wasn't a straight route.
Nope.
No, and that's what I say. Just being in education, and being an assistant superintendent, and being a CIO of the largest school district here in Detroit, that was a journey. It wasn't a straight shot for me. In my first life, I started out as a chemist. I wasn't even in technology. I was a chemist, and I made the transition though, because STEM is STEM. Once you get hatched, and I should thank my boyfriend from college, Desi, who I followed to all his computer science classes. And I ended up getting a degree without getting the paper because I followed him to all of his classes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why women don't think about that. Follow the smart guy. It may pay off later. Right?
Gotta find him.
Okay, so when we look at education equity and we look at the history of education, I'm going to tell you again, doing the research, I was like blown away at what transpired. And I said, it's so funny because in the 1830s to the 1840s is when they started that whole conceptual thing about education reform, right? But the thing is, people fail to realize is that at that time, that's when they put in taxation. And what they said was, hey, tax supported schools to give their children an equal chance. Now, you know what that meant. That meant if you lived in an area where the tax bracket was lower, what did that mean as far as taxes being funded to your schools versus the schools that had higher paying jobs? So think about it from that perspective. If we weren't in the jobs that were basically providing us to live in neighborhoods that had a higher tax bracket, were we really looking at an equal chance at education? What's your thoughts on that?
Really, education should not be driven by the zip code. And I know you're talking about a different era, but
Yes.
My thoughts are so systemic. Back during 1830, we were learning education was not the problem that it is today. And I have a theory, and I've run a business behind that whole notion of using data to drive results.
Yes.
What we do in education is deliver instruction to children below grade level. In the inner cities, if you look at the data, parents send their kids to school thinking they're learning at grade level. They are not. The data says they're not. Yet, they're tested at grade level or above. And so I have another arm of my business that uses the power of data to drive achievement to grade level. When kids succeed at grade level, they know about STEM. They know about everything they need to know about to be successful in life.
And that's what people need to understand. So in the 1800s and 1830s, you got kids who were in that situation in those classrooms, and you're looking at education for African Americans. The problem is that African Americans, one, it was sporadic. Two, they would pull our kids from school and put them back in the fields or provide them with some training program that was very close to slavery. They were training them to do a job to support them. So when you look at that, you've got a large proportion of kids. And of course, we had the one room, the schoolhouse, right? So how many kids technically could really be educated when you're in substandard environment? Mm-hmm. So just to let you know, I do like a tremendous amount of research. And so this young lady, and I want us to watch just a little bit of what she has, but I'm going to tell you, I was so surprised when I saw this. I'm going to share this with you guys because it was just, and let me know if you can hear this or not. If you can't hear it, I'll be sure to go back and click back.
Language and call it what it really is. It's not an achievement gap. It's an education.
Can you hear
debt.
that?
Mm-hmm.
All of the foregone schooling resources that were never invested in the education of the Black and brown child over time. A little known secret in American history is that the only American institution created specifically for people of color is the American slave trade. And some would argue the prison system, but that's another topic for another TED Talk. The public school system of this country was built, bought, and paid for using commerce generated from the slave trade and slave labor. While African Americans were enslaved and prohibited from schooling, their labor established the very institution from which they were excluded. Ever since then, every court case, educational policy, reform has been an attempt to retrofit the design rather than just stopping and acknowledging we've had it all wrong from the beginning. An oversimplification of American educational history. All right, just bear with me. Blacks were kept out, the whole slavery thing. With the help of philanthropic white people, they built their own schools. Separate but equal was okay. But while we all know things were indeed separate, they were in no ways equal. Enter Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas in 1954. Legal separation of the races is now illegal. But very few people pay attention to all of the court cases since then that have undone the educational promised land for every child that Brown versus Board intended. Some argue that today our schools are now more segregated than they ever were before we tried to desegregate them in the first place. Teaching my kids about desegregation, the Little Rock Nine, the Civil Rights Movement is a real awkward moment in my classroom when I have to hear the voice of a child ask, if schools were desegregated in 1954, how come there are no white kids here? These kids aren't dumb. They know exactly what's happening and what's not. They know that when it comes to schooling, Black lives don't matter, and they never have. For years, I tried desperately to cultivate in my kids a love of reading. I'd amassed a modest classroom library of books I'd accumulated from secondhand shops, thrift stores, attics, But whenever I said those dreadful words, take out a book and read, you'd think I'd just declared war. It was torture. One day, after I'd heard about this website called Donors Choose, where classroom teachers create wish lists of items they need for their classroom, and anonymous donors fulfill them, I figured I'd go out on a limb and just make a wish list of the teenager's dream library. Over 200 brand new books were sent to my room, piece by piece. Every day there were new deliveries, and my kids would exclaim with glee, "Oh, this feels like Christmas." Then they'd say, "Miss Sumner, where did these books come from?" And then I'd reply, "Strangers from all over the country wanted you to have these." And then they'd say, almost suspiciously, "But they're brand new." To which I'd reply, "You deserve brand new books."
So what's your thoughts on that? This is happening in 2020. I'm just saying, when I saw that, I was kind of blown away. So I just, I want to get your thoughts on what you were thinking about when she shared that information about the donor books, like the books that came to the school and the kids' perspective on wow and everything, and her whole timeline monologue about what she shared about education. So, Dr. Smelly, what do you think about that?
It brought back some memories that I had when I was a principal in Atlanta, and they were doing bubbling sheets and kids weren't reading. And so Mortimer Adler's a book about the Socratic method, giving kids books, bringing in people from corporate America, and these kids were reading because they were enjoying the experience of comparing and contrasting to 4 different books. Mm-hmm. First of all, she's awesome. I really enjoyed that podcast. But in order to get a kid to read, you have to think outside of the box, just like she did. You have to raise the level of expectation, which is what Common Core, actually my company is trained in over 47 states Common Core standards. Mm-hmm. It's out of the window somehow, but it was meant to provide an equilibrium for all kids, because it's very concise about what you learn at this grade. It builds on that grade. It's very clear and succinct, but it's gone. In my opinion, that was an approach to bring equity so that we would know that a fourth grader in Detroit would be learning the same thing as a fourth grader in New York.
So, Dr. Smelly, but I do have a question. Every state did not adopt the same Common Core standards. So how can you measure stuff that's not equally stacked?
Every state, 47 governors decided that students and teachers in 47 states will learn Common Core standards. The standards are the same for every state. They're not now, but they were originally.
Oh, originally, because now they're not, for sure.
No, Smarter Balance, and the assessments were different.
Okay.
But Common Core, it's there. I'm in New York, and the schools here do use Common Core to some extent, but they do their own thing with it. So the level of expectation about a kid learning this at grade level simply is not there. It's not there.
Because my co-host, he's in New York, and he works with the chancellors and all of that for all school districts in the state of New York. And we talk about this quite often. And it disproportionately, even across their school districts, there are concerns as it relates to education and the delivery of it. But they're working expediently to level the playing field by offering everyone the same free resources. But one of the things that really helped them was going virtual, because now all your resources have to be at the touch of your fingers. So now you do have access to the same things equally. Now, mind you, of course, when you have a passionate superintendent like you in one school district, of course, that one might have a few extra bells and whistles, but that's because of your networking, your relationship, right? So you may have a corporate sponsor versus another district in New York that may not have one. So that's the difference. Yeah. But at least the playing field level set it. So, you know, as we continue to kind of go through this presentation, which I loved her, I've watched her several times on TED Talks, and it's just amazing. But when you talk about educations from 1850 to 1877, you know, they succeeded in convincing many leading citizens in merits of establishing a system of public common schools. Now, we talk about common schools, but that's what the Common Core standard concept came from. Every school started at a common time, had the same common curriculum, and everybody studied at the same pace. And it was basically something they said, okay, we need to kind of test this. But that concept came from England. It came from New England. It wasn't even a concept or a strategy that came from an American. It came from New England, which, by the way, you know, we got to look at who founded us and who started America. So they say, you know, who delivered the freedom concept. But in 1850, now these are the classrooms that the African-American kids are in. Same time period. So even though you're saying that you want to set a standard of common existence and common learning for all students, it's not common because the facilities that we had at that particular time, obviously our classroom looked considerably different than theirs. So the investment wasn't there. So what's your concept on, even in the 1800s, when we were starting the conversation, we were still coming in from behind.
And the saga continues. You know, as you were talking, I was just thinking about, I was also a senior VP of 4 different large IT corporations seeking to do business within the education space. And one of my contracts was housing the national assessment for the U.S. Department of Education, NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. I enjoyed taking that data and re-stratifying it and showing without exception, in every state, Black kids were scoring lower than Hispanic kids who did not have a good acquisition of language. Of course, then Asians who were off the charts, and then whites. And so again, why is that when you talk about equity? Because they're all in the same classrooms learning. Now, let's be clear, NAEP does not test every kid in every school.
Right.
There's a scientific balance. However, if you're not being prescriptive with it, and I'm taking a broad brush spectrum, and I have observed the data, and I dealt with this at the U.S. Department of Education, and they knew not, because they don't stratify that data. And since we were housing it, I was able to do that. You know, our kids are not getting the level of education that they should receive. Title I is a blessing and a curse.
It is.
Because in Title I schools, now it's a whole Title I district, And teachers go in the mode of remediation, unless you're in my district, where I use data to make sure that every kid without exception was learning at grade level or above, because you know what? You can't catch the flu if you've not been exposed.
Exactly.
So if you're not teaching at grade level, kids can learn at grade level. I don't care if they're special education. I don't care if they have issues. They have no parents at home. Kids can learn at grade level if you give them an opportunity and bring them along. We're doing a disservice to our children.
100% a disservice. And as we go through this time period of what we call our education for minorities, the transition you will see will still consistently track exactly what you said. Like, we're still coming from behind. So now we're here in the 1900s. We have 70% of all American children between the ages of 5 and 17 were enrolled in schools. By 1910, that percentage increased only slightly by 79%. For example, in 1905, the average school was only 151 days long, and the average student attended school only 105 days. We increased the number of days, but our African-American kids were still behind. If you look at their classrooms, and again, just a visual concept that, but education for Blacks in the South in the early 1900s was worse in many ways. Southern schools were racially segregated. Fewer African-Americans were enrolled in school. Black children were often pulled to do what? To work on the farms with their families because they had to provide. So when you look at that, you know, there was some strides, but then you have this one person in 1915, Fannie Ruth Patterson from Hinckley, Illinois, was the first African-American student to graduate from Northern. After completing a high school, Fannie worked for a few years before enrolling. And then the thing is, she left and became a teacher. Mm-hmm. So, but they'll take one person out of the hundreds, out of the thousands, out of the millions and say, well, we didn't give you, you know, in just services, you know, we look at her. She was able to make it through. But then we look in 1921, you know, education for African Americans, this is segregated. This is a division of Negro education in 1921. And thank God that these ladies were able to learn the respiratory system. So either they were thinking about going into the medical field or being nurses or something, but they were offered that. But look how many young ladies are in that classroom. There's less than a handful of ladies in there. It's not like 10 or 20 people sitting in there. So it's a small group of women who were afforded that opportunity in 1921. But again, I digress. When I look at this picture, I got a little devastated because I could see that 6 Black children completed their first week at Griffin School in 1925 at the first Kentucky public school that attempted integration. 6 Black children. Mm-hmm. And this was enough to make it news. They reported this.
Yeah, I can see them.
I didn't even know what to think. I mean, you're like me when I first saw this.
1955, yeah.
We look at 5 years later in 1960, and just the overall African-American movement in education, these guys were very aggressive about making sure that Black and brown children receive better education. But he says 4 unarmed students were killed and 9 wounded when Ohio National Guard stormed a student demonstration at Kent State University. These students have been justifiably immortalized in music and in history, which I've heard them several times. But when I read the story, one of the things that shocked me is that they were like, but people are forgetting just in the same spot at Jackson State University, 2 students were killed and a dozen wounded just 11 days before the Kent State situation occurred. And people are forgetting that a lot of us died for us to be educated and for us to kind of toss it away. You know, I want to use another word, but we just toss it. So what's your thoughts on parents who don't understand how important education is, making sure kids get to school, reading and working with them at home? I mean, people lost their lives for us to be educated, and we're not fully grasping that. We need to breathe air.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because we just launched a new product called Parent Power, where we send information to parents to help them understand, okay, the teacher may not be teaching at grade level, but these are the standards. This is what is expected. Click this link, and here's a resource to help you help your child at home. I don't know if you're aware of it, but in many schools across the country, it is not commonplace for parents to talk to teachers, for parents to come to schools. And it's been my experience that many teachers don't want parents in the classroom. And I've had a lot of fun breaking up that whole misnomer, because that's where they belong if they have a desire to see what their kids are doing. Again, I go back to what I said before. Parents think kids are learning at grade level. They let the schools do it.
Yeah.
They dress them, they send them to school. Teachers are remediating kids if they're Black, Hispanic, and in low-income school districts. I'm telling you what I know. And I've lectured conferences across this nation, and I have talked about raising the bar and inspecting what you expect, and kids will come along for the ride. I've gone back to those groups of teachers from across the country, and they said, oh my God, kids succeeded. So when you talk about equity, we have an obligation as educators to bring parents along, which is what Parent Power does, and we're beginning to launch it now. Teachers have an obligation to bring parents along, but they don't. So it's almost like you need a Martin Luther King woman or educator who can.
I don't know, that could be you, Dr. Smith. I think you should be the Dr. King woman of right now. And I'm going to tell you, when I definitely want you to come back so we can talk more about your products and everything that you have, because I really want people to get a really great because the thing is, when I share this with a lot of educators and I work with a lot of different school districts across the United States, it would be great for them to see an African American who has products that can support the urban school district. So it definitely, I definitely want you to come back and share more about that. But give me 1 second. We do have to take our commercial breaks, Dr. Smiley. That's like the rule that we have here, so we can continue to play our bills. And we also have one comment. So when we come back, we're going to go to comments, everybody. Myself and Dr. Spinelli, we're going to love to talk about what's next here on Educate. Okay, guys, welcome back to the second half. I'm going to tell you right now, Dr. Spinelli, I don't know if you're falling in love with her, but I think she's outstanding. She is like a powerhouse in IT, and I really appreciate her joining me on this platform as we continue our conversation around education equity. You guys, we're definitely going to have her back, so just so she can share with you guys the products and everything that she offers out here. And again, I'm really 100% support other business owners, especially when they're in IT. I love when they come on. So, and I just want to let you know, we have a lot of people who watch this in different countries. And I know a lot of times they want to leave comments, and it's really hard for them because we're not speaking their language. So there is a language converter. And if you guys want to say something, be sure to click on that language converter so we can share your any of your comments. So guys, what we're doing is we're just taking a journey down education over the years for minorities. And I'm going to tell you, when I saw this, and our current, at the time, she was a senator, but she's now our vice president. At the time, Senator Biden was he was the vice president, right? So this comment that she was explaining to him in a conversation, which is really weird, that I was one of those girls. Like, you know, she evoked the forgotten era and half a century distance when federal courts mandated busing of Black children to schools to white neighborhoods. The court ordered controversial and unpopular against almost all whites and many Blacks. But the thing is that this happened in the 50s and 60s, and she was like, but I was one of those kids that they bust in. So when people, they don't understand, this woman is now vice president. She was one of those kids that was on the bus, that if she had not had that opportunity, she may or may not be vice president right now. She may have not had the life journey that she's had. I mean, we do understand that the education services provided in those schools were definitely a lot different than ours. But within that same period, you got the first Black students who integrated into a public school. And this is like astounding to me when I had to go back and look up where each one of these people were and what they did in their lives. But then they talked about the struggle that they went to. Now, for me, of course, I'm going to be honest with you, and I don't care who knows it. Excuse me. I was actually born in this period. And I just want to say, for me, it was a little bit different in the sense is that these things were already happening. So as we get further in the story, I'm going to share something with you guys. But in 1971, even in England, they were bringing people in from other countries and educating them. But the difference is, Dr. Spinelli, guess what? They were educating them in specific areas. Here we have a group of Middle Eastern people being taught what? Mathematics. Their focus was mathematics when they came to England. What England did was they identified the areas where they knew they needed more support in their infrastructure and brought people in from other countries and educated them specifically in those areas. I don't even know. I mean, like, that made so much sense, right?
Yeah.
It makes so much sense. We're inviting people over. I looked at this and I said, oh my gosh, this young lady showed up to class her first day, segregated school, and no one showed up. She was the only one in the photography class because they did not want to be in that space with her. But guess what? She came. She came to learn. Now, I don't know where the teacher is, and I don't know who took this picture. Maybe it was a photography teacher who took the picture. I don't know. But the thing is, she came because she wanted to be educated, and she fought for that. And that's what people don't understand. And I don't take it, just like tossing away like it's no big deal. This woman extremely impressed me. Margaret Collins was a former substitute teacher, and she worked with poor Black students. She actually took her retirement, $5,000 of her pension, and started what we now call charter schools. She started one of the first charter schools, and Ronald Reagan was so impressed with her, he wanted her to be the Secretary of Education because of what she had done in Chicago. That impressed me. That a substitute teacher, because Dr. Spinelli, our substitute teachers today are not people who would be starting schools.
No. I haven't met one, let me say.
We haven't met one. But the thing is that, 14 years, one after working as a substitute teacher for 14 years, I just want to say that's a different type of sub. I don't even know a substitute teacher that would go and start a charter school, but not only take their pension to do it, to the point that a president recognized their success, right? Now,
okay.
Now this is going to take you back. This is when they allowed prayer in the schools. I don't even think people understand at one point there was prayer in schools. I know that because when I started school, there was prayer.
Yeah. Well, when I was a principal in Atlanta, there was prayer.
Yeah.
And separation of church and state, but we had prayer on the mic every day. And I was by it. Yes, I did. In defiance, because kids need that. They enjoy that.
I love that. Because in Michigan, they love that whole separation of church and state.
Well, they do in Georgia too. Don't get me wrong. I just was a different kind of person.
Remember we used to do Pledge of Allegiance and then they took that out?
We did that too. Pledge of Allegiance, prayer, and then some nice conversation around something inspirational that would help kids get through the day or the week or at home, whatever.
I love that. And you know what? Honestly, I'm going to say I took more pride in being an African American because we went through the Pledge of Allegiance, because we started our day. It was like, it was saying to me, this is where you should be. This is the right place for you, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what I don't know if people understand that messaging. Like the way you start your day means a lot. It impacts you.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. So many things get in the way. I tell you what, the Pledge of Allegiance and prayer helps, and then some type of inspirational unit for kids. Yeah. They love that, and I let the kids do it. We didn't have adults do it. There's a different kid every day, or a group of kids every day that looked forward to this, and kids like hearing themselves. So, but so much gets in the way of public education today, and it shouldn't. It shouldn't.
Because you were creating leaders, people who want to take responsibility for their actions and creating leaders, and that's so impressive. And I don't think people get that. When you give kids a task or responsibility to manage it appropriately, you're teaching them leadership skills, and that matters because we need more leaders.
That's right.
And then I looked at this and I kind of stood back for a minute and said, okay, why was this celebrated? In 1988, second graders from PS 27 in New York. I put this in here because my co-host was from New York. I like to pick on them. They took them to the Bronx Zoo. In 1988, their New York elementary school children got 4 hours of experienced science the way scientists do by touching and observing and experimenting. This is in 1988. Now, you know, being in education and running your own school district, you do understand people over the years have kept reintroducing this like this was a new idea all the way through, like, 2000. And I'm kind of blown away that I'm not getting this part, because I guess I started off in the science world. I was doing this when I was a kid in the before the 88s is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But this was major news. But the thing is, why I'm not upset about it? Because our kids were in it.
Exactly.
That's what I'm not saying. But in like a year later, 1989, here's the introduction to computer. And I told my son, this is how our computers. We couldn't carry them. They were too heavy. I don't even know. Remember we had the floppy disk? That was like really big, right?
Oh, yeah, I do. I remember when we had punch cards and it filled a room.
Listen, remember you used to have punch cards.
Yes, I do.
That's what I'm saying. The DOS system, people crack up. But this is the thing. In 1988, this was the biggest thing. A volunteer came in to train students on how to use the computer.
Yeah.
And this was in New York, in Harlem.
That's interesting.
And so this is so interesting how many people have made these attempts. And I don't know, but she looks like she could be Latino, right?
She does.
She's a minority. So again, despite the inequalities, we have continued to fight and try to bring it ahead. Now, this right here, I'm going to get your feedback on this, and then I'm going to share mine. This is when they decided to do single-sex classrooms, right? This is in 1996.
Mm-hmm.
And they decided that, but teaching boys math and science and English separately from girls was new in public schools for more than a dozen states. They tested the concept. What do you think about this when they decided to separate the classrooms?
I wonder what the data says about what the difference, what the statistics back, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, because in my opinion, it doesn't matter if they're all girls or they're all boys. What matters is delivering instruction at grade level without exception, teaching science in elementary schools where it really does not occur because there's not a book for it, social studies. What matters is not sex. What matters is not race. What matters is what's being taught. So we could get every kid at grade level, without exception, successful every day that they come to school. Then maybe we could look at all girls and all boys and have some conversations around things that have to do with things that boys shouldn't hear.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a long-winded answer to your question, but it shouldn't matter.
No, I'm going to tell you, and I hate to say this, but my entire parenting was a case study for me. So I put my son in an all-boy private school, right? But I went to a traditional school. So my son went to private school where nothing but boys. He worked really hard, of course, because it was really expensive. And it was like going to college while you were in high school. And in middle school was like going to high school while he was in middle school because it was private school. But then I put him in a public school for his last 2 years in high school where he had girls in the room with him. When I tell you my son worked harder because he was so trying to impress the girls, I said, if I had known this, I would have saved money. I just want to put you in here. So I don't know, but I would say he worked hard, and he was on the football team. My son is 6'2". He's a linebacker, but he's engineering. He's smart. He's really smart, but the girls loved him. And I said, is this what it took for me not to say, is your homework done?
Yeah, I just wonder when your son went into public education from private education. My daughter went to private school in Boston too, very same thing. It was boarding. What was the difference for him? Was he at par? Was he?
He was ahead.
Exactly. Which kind of slows down the learning process in a sense. Because my daughter finished Governor Dummer Academy in Boston, and what she learned, she was fluent in Spanish in her 9th grade year.
Yeah.
That was the expectation, total immersion, for example. Anyway,
right.
The answer to your question, it should not matter.
It should not matter. And that's the whole thing. It shouldn't matter. And I was like, okay, so if we do go, now I'm going to tell you right now, I would probably be for this because our kids are more interested in things sexually and it concerns me. Like, I'm thinking the girls will be less concerned about what they're wearing and what they look like and focus on the academics.
Yeah.
So in this case, I'm in this time period, maybe when I was going to school, when you were going to school, it didn't matter because we managed things accordingly. But right now, I wouldn't be opposed to a little separation.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be opposed to it.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
Now, in 1999, and I'm so glad you're here on it. In 1999, they figured out they should start replacing textbooks with computers. That's what this is saying. In Dallas, 1999. We're now, and you know what I'm about to say, we're now in 2022 and we're still talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's disgusting, quite frankly. Back in 1986, when I was a principal in Atlanta, I've done so much more in education than be principal, but I think that was my most rewarding job I've ever had my entire life. So IBM gave computers to all of my kindergarten kids. And we had Apple computers running Jostens Learning for the rest of the kids. So I had a whole school, every kid had a computer. But IBM thought they were going to work with my kindergarten kids and teach them keyboarding. And I said, not. These kids will learn through experience how to keyboard. We're going to add some subject matter content and we're going to do something totally different. Let me explain why. I had a group of kindergartners whose parents were on drugs. They couldn't stay in their seats. I had a janitor, and he taught these kids to conceptualize the value of numbers and compute. I let him work with this classroom of kids. And 2 weeks, I went down to the cafeteria and sat with them. While I'm trying to count on my fingers almost, they had thrown the pencil, they were done. So let's fast forward to City Hall in Atlanta. It goes way up and people are looking down, television cameras panning. And these little kids are on a table, then a chair, then down to the floor, solving algebra equations, okay?
Wow, I love it.
These kids were multiplying fractions, decimals, and percents, performing around the state of Georgia. Okay, and so when you talk about rate, they were fluent in Kiswahili.
I love it.
Spanish. I'm talking about kindergarten kids. So these kids were doing a curriculum on computer. Again, it goes back, Christine, to raising the bar.
Exactly.
You know, online learning, Philadelphia, I remember reading it in the paper. The district just didn't do it.
Right.
And I took Apple to task in New York City. Millions were spent for these kids to have computers. My heart is with the homeless. I grew up in the project. My heart is in projects.
Exactly.
They didn't have internet. So don't give me an Apple computer and not make the cable companies give my kids access to cable. And they still have that problem. So you're right.
Right now today.
Disgusting. They're behind the times because educators have not gotten on.
And I'm going to say this, and people always laugh. I said, I think it's because I've been able to go between corporate and education that I understand the need. But when you're just in education, you're talking to me and you say, well, we're doing so many great things. But the great things that you're doing is still not on task where they need to be. Now, this I thought would be interesting, and you're a fellow techie, so you get it. They were excited that this woman had whiteboards, not chalkboards, but had whiteboards, not automated, animated whiteboards, but just whiteboards in 2002. But I'm just saying, a lot of school districts are still fighting for this, just for whiteboards, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I thought this was so interesting in 2007 when social media went live. A teacher had to go through and tell students not to use slang in their writing. Mm-hmm. Do not want to see slang, and actually went through the words not to use or abbreviations. This is in 2007. Wow. You know, right now we're still having the same problem in the classroom in 2022. Now, in a suburban school in 2009, I have never seen this happen in an urban school. She took out all the seats and replaced them with balls because she said it would help build better stability, right? And posture, and required them to pay attention. I have never seen this in any urban school. But again, this is our timeline. This is our period. This is what's happening in that space, right? Mm-hmm. So now we're in a time period of 2011. This blew my mind. This school district has a glass top channel that allows collected rainwater in their science classroom and pushes the rainwater through the center of the classroom where they're learning environmental science in real time.
Yeah. Which goes back to school design and school construction and having the money to and the vision to be able to do this. I built 5 schools.
I'm sorry, Dr. Spinelli, go back to what you said. It's the vision.
Yeah.
You have educators who have the money, but they have no
vision. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's because we have been in the IT sector and also in education.
Yeah.
And so, the world is our oyster. It's a whole universe. However, teachers like my sister, who has always taught school and been a guidance counselor, she doesn't have the vision that I have. How can you if you've not experienced it?
And see, that's the thing. We're the example of how we always think outside of the box.
Yeah.
Because to us in IT, there is no box.
No.
There's no box.
No, either.
But I said to myself, how amazing would this be for urban education to have something like this in their science classrooms, for our kids to see what you can do and how it impacts.
Yeah.
It blew my mind. I was like, I want this in my house though. But at the same time, 2002, we have an African-American teacher who is now trying to figure out if it's okay that she has students as Facebook friends. Do you see how the difference is? The suburban school has rainwater coming through the middle of a science class. But in 2012, same time period, we have a Black teacher who's concerned about what? This potential law that may come up, this rule that says you cannot be friends with your students on Facebook. Where are we at? So the thing is, what happened, Dr. Spinelli? What happened? What happened?
There's just a disconnect. There's just a major disconnect. And there are some issues around Facebook. I remember when I was deputy superintendent in Norfolk, Virginia, and I remember there being a school policy indicating that teachers could not interface with kids
Correct.
on Facebook. We allowed security to look at what was going on their Facebook pages. But there could not be any back and forth. Now, I cannot justify, I don't understand, but a teacher should be able to communicate with the kid, and it should not matter what the vehicle is.
It should be appropriate communication.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing I have to say. Guys, we have to take a quick commercial break. Dr. Spinelli, I don't even like doing commercial breaks with you because I'm so excited. Like, I don't even want to do them. But we have to take a quick commercial break. And guys, we'll be right back with some more on Educators Roundtable. Okay, guys, welcome back for our third half of Educators Roundtable. I already know what you guys are going to be asking me. When can Dr. Spinelli come back? Don't worry about it. She's coming back. Education equity is not a one podcast conversation. We're going to be working on education equity, guys, for the next couple of months. It might take us until the summer. So, Dr. Spinelli, I'm going to tell you right now, they're loving you because, one, I love you because fellow IT lady in education, the space is not that large, and I like to see fellow folks in that space. I'm going to tell you some of the things that we've been talking about during our educationist journey. I know you've been shocked. I've been kind of shocked, too, of how still, I don't know if we're doing it to ourselves or they're doing it to us, or we're just kind of taking it as it goes. Or it's like somebody says, watch the hand over here while this other stuff is happening. I don't know what that's about. But I kind of feel like sometimes of what we're doing. Of course, I couldn't do anything about education when not including our first Black president. A 7th grade class in Buck Lodge Middle School in Maryland, he went and he started talking about an iPad, right? Connecting students to the next generation of broadband and wireless technology. You, I know, will love this. We're still talking about this right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. This was in 2014.
Could it be that IT people within school districts sit in a silo and they do what they do? And what they do is not engaged in any way within the instructional process. And so you have teachers who don't understand how to make it all fit. You know, so I'm just making an excuse because there is no excuse for us today. Kids should be able to learn better at home with the right equipment and the internet, etc. They should be able to.
Should. But in 2014, we were having the same conversation we're having now. Now, this one was a little heartbreaking for me when they talked about San Francisco as a hotbed for technology and startups. And it is. It really is. A land of seemingly never-ending opportunities, with the city depicted on TV shows and magazines, sits a school district that is one of the most diverse in the nation and faces some of the most pressing opportunity gaps. So in San Francisco, the Unified School District education is has a social injustice issue. Wow, are you kidding me? So basically, they focused on relentlessly on surfacing equity and the role that a systemic oppression plays in the education landscape. You're talking about, you are like 2 minutes away from what we call the think tank space, and you're still struggling with this. You should be producing more IT African Americans, minorities than any other state. So it's like this was happening in 2018. This is not that long ago. It's a couple of years,
still happening,
and it's still happening right now.
Yeah.
And so that's, I tell people all the time, I'm always concerned that when I do research like this, it amazes me. I looked at this and I said, this is, we're in 2020. And real talk, it says improved student agency prior to the pandemic. The ability to learn independently was a skill many schools deliberately cultivated in children. But learning how to learn is an essential, it's like very essential to how we grow our students. But now at a time when children aren't learning under the constant supervision of an adult, as well as the future, they will not be relegated for jobs and careers in certain areas. But we already know that. So COVID has understood the factoring, the model of education is insufficient, and that the schools must also intentionally develop 21st century skills like problem solving and preparing for lifelong learning. With some students already proficient in operating Zoom technology, the pandemic has intentionally furthered children's independence. What's your thoughts on that?
I agree, but it's difficult for a kid to learn at home if it's not conducive to learning, if it's not quiet. And I think about kids that might be in the projects where there's not a lot of space. I think about kids who don't have parents in the house, or whose parents are on drugs. Yeah. But still, it would not be a problem for me as a superintendent, because every kid would not only have technology, every kid would have internet. And I'd be looking at data to make sure that every kid was learning at grade level or above. It wouldn't be a problem for me.
Exactly.
I'm different.
Exactly. And I agree with you 100%. This right here knocked my socks off. I'm just going to tell you this. The Education Equity Action Plan aims to addressing pre-existing fundamental racial inequities in access to quality education. The initiative is designed to pave the way for the institution of a citywide K-12 Black Studies curriculum in the nation's largest school district. This just happened in 2022. Are you kidding me? And I just want to say one, thank you. I applaud them. But my thing is, I'm still going to say, are you kidding me? Are we still fighting to teach Black Studies curriculum? I'm not understanding why this had to be an initiative that had to go out this far, and then we have to broadcast it. So my response to all of this is, are we still fighting for equality? 222 years after the 1800s and 67 years after school segregation, I still ask that question because we have to look at the truth. I would really love for people to join the conversation and sign up to be a guest so we can continue to discuss education equity. And of course, always, I thank everybody for joining us here on the podcast. Dr. Spinelli and I are going to continue this conversation for the next 6 minutes without the presentation, but I want to thank everybody before you log off. Thank you so much for joining the conversation. So Dr. Spinelli, what do you think about that in 2022? that big initiative that went out for Black Studies. I'm a little bit concerned. I'm happy, but I'm a little bit concerned.
I'm in New York City. I'm sorry, I'm in Long Beach, New York, very close, 5 miles from New York City. And I have friends in management within the education system. I have never heard of what you just presented. So thank you for that. I don't know if it's a prescribed curriculum that someone has already designed that's supposed to be effective. But I don't know why, because the world is Latinx, the world is Asian, the world is Black. And so I remember, again, as principal in Atlanta, all Black kids, I couldn't believe it. I came in from North Carolina. We were integrated, all Black kids and all Black teachers, and I broke it up. And I got some white kids in my building. I don't understand why there's a need for an all Black curriculum. It takes us back to where we came from, in a sense.
Again, I like to share with people, I'm not always saying I'm for things that happen. I mean, I'm happy that they got it to the point where they did. I really hate that it had to be initiative, but I'm also very concerned that it even had to happen. It got to that point. So again, folks, when we talk about education equity, it's amazing how many things it impacts. And I know we started the conversation. We initially we looked at the Common Core standards. We looked at all the different assessments. We talked about a curriculum that's being provided in school districts. To kind of go back to what you were saying, we looked at, are you teaching at grade level, above grade level, or behind grade level? So when you tell me you have to put in this 3rd grade reading law, you put it in to do what? To assess what it is that you're teaching me at, or what you should be teaching me at, right? Because if my materials are only for below, how do you expect me to achieve that goal of testing at? And then someone raised this question to me, and again, folks, we already know looking at me that I can't be racist. I'm not racist. But this is the question somebody said to me. Well, Christine, with more than 70% of the teachers in urban schools being not minority, why do they keep saying we're behind? If the people we have in our schools are non-minorities teaching us, are they intentionally teaching us the wrong information? I said, you know what? That's up for grabs. It's going to be a conversation I'm going to have an educators roundtable. I don't know. We need to talk about that. I don't know. I went to schools where my teachers were mostly African Americans. By the way, thank you, Miss Sutton. My teacher always say thank you to Miss Sutton. She stayed on me. I don't even know if Miss Sutton is still living. But at Northwestern High School, Miss Sutton was, she was like the bee's knees next to Ernie Rogers, who I traveled all over the country playing in the band because I was the only girl in the jazz band. So I got a chance to see the world in high school. And that was great. And I also went to college at the same time while I was in high school. But again, my parents, it was different. My parents were like us. You know, they were really focused on my education and knowing that I was a little bit different. They were like, school is not enough for her. We've got to give her more, right? And they fed that need. So I'm going to say to you, I really want to spend more time with you so we can talk about all your curriculum, all the things you're doing in school districts. I'm personally going to talk to you outside of this. So I want to ask you, when we go off the air, just stay on for me in the green room. I want to talk to you because I think you're such a rock star. Yeah. And I love that you guys have a parent program. I have to have you back just to talk about that. Okay. I think so many of our school districts right now need to connect more with parents, provide services to them, because in this virtual platform, you're asking people who have not gone to school to be educators to now educate their students at home on technology that they're not familiar with. So you're giving them 2 things that's feeling like 10 things, right?
Yeah. And you're sending that technology home to the parent, but no one is really communicating with the parent. No one has had that conversation. So let's say that, we're going to have PTA and everybody's going to come out. It doesn't happen. Parents don't go to PTA meetings. No. They just don't have time, whatever. And so how else can you communicate with a parent? Every parent has a cell phone. If they don't have food in the cabinet, that cell phone is working.
I think the same way. I said to them, why aren't you using social media and just having these private meetings where you send the links out, text the links to your parents and have a meeting? Why don't you use the YouTube channel, a private YouTube channel, and create videos where you can train parents on how to use your tech, right, or how to log into your school district to look at their students' attendance. Right. I don't know what to say. How to set up a virtual meeting with their teacher just to meet and talk with the principal or the teacher or the social worker. how to get assistance when they need it financially or food. I don't know. Am I wrong, Dr. Spinelli?
No, you're not wrong at all. But we're harnessing information, multiple indices of measure, and shooting individual information to parents. You know, in Title I, there's that the lowest quartile must move so many points.
Right.
So focus in on that lower quartile and make sure we're raising the bar and giving the parents the data and resources they need to help these kids come along, which could mean no Title I funding in time when parents really get involved, when they really get engaged. You know, my PTA meetings at Pickett Elementary School in Atlanta were standing room only. You want to know why? I showed data and statistics, where the classes were, what they were learning, where their kids were, and what they could do to help bridge the gap.
But I don't think it was just that either. You know what I think it was? I think it was you. And I think people need to understand is that the person who's the head of your school or your school district, really, if you have an inviting, I want to help you personality, parents are going to fall in love with you. You're going to become infectious. And when they know you really care about them, the kids are going to be your branding and marketing out on the street. They're going to get you more kids. They're going to be like, Mom, no, you got to, because Dr. Spinelli said it and she's awesome and we love her. Now, that's what people don't get. So that's why you've got to come back, because we've got so much to talk about. I think you're a rock star in education. I think you're a rock star in technology. And I want to share you with as many people as I can. So guys, listen, as always, you know, I'm going to thank you for joining us here. And Dr. Spinelli, if you have any last words you want to share with people before you come back on another session of Educators Roundtable.
I would say thank you so much for listening. I look forward to coming back again, because there's so much to say. There's so much needed for our kids. And until every kid that's Black is learning at grade level or above, I will never, ever have this conversation finished. It's time to have some real conversations around what it is that we're going to do to bridge the gap. If you're teaching, put them at grade level. You think they can't? I promise you they can.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I don't even have to finish tonight. Dr. Spinelli, thanks so much for coming on. Guys, next time we come back, we're going to have Dr. Rush. And as like I said, guys, he's a rock star in education, especially for African-American males. He is really the legacy that we need to really focus on supporting. How do we do that for African-American males? But as always, guys, I really appreciate you taking the time to join me here at Educators Roundtable. You know, you can sign up to be a guest. You can go to any of the social media sites and click that link and sign up to be a guest anytime as we continue our conversation around education equity. I'll see you guys next week, same time, same place.